Hey guys, this is Blue Forest. I hope you're doing well. So I've gotten a lot of questions about all of the LOC missions, and so I've decided to do a few videos on LOC. Today we're going to start with Rulers of Kaon, LOC1, and then I am also going to do a video on ROTK in a few days. But for today we're going to start with Rulers of Kaon, LOC1. And so I want to go over preparation for LOC because I think that whenever you do any of the LOCs, you should prepare for it. You should plan for it a little bit. I want to talk about the bots and the mods that they're on, as well as recommended teams. And so just to start off, okay, Rulers of Kaon is the first big long mission that you do once you get to a point where you have, a decent roster of bots and you're a good enough player that you can get through those long fights. And so there's a couple things to think about. Well, if you are a somewhat experienced player and you're thinking about doing Rulers of Kaon, the best thing that you can do is to simply practice in it. Okay, there's a reason why bots like Mixmaster and Primal and ROTK are the sort of resident punching bags in the game, because you don't have to spend much energy or time practicing against them. So I would recommend that you go in and you start to fight against bots like Mixmaster and Sideswipe. And once you get to the point to where you're beating them without getting destroyed, without taking tons of damage, then you're probably ready to give the entire map a try, right? The main thing to be mindful of is you need to have your defensive game down. Are you good at dodging? Can you evade? Can you anticipate the opponent's attacks? Can you bait out specials? Things like that, without having to overly rely on blocking and stuff like that. Once your defensive game is pretty good, it doesn't have to be amazing, but once it's pretty good, then you're certainly ready to try out LOC1, okay? So I want to talk about preparation, because there are a few things that you need to think about, okay? The first has to do with item use, because you are going to want to have a decent stash of items saved up, right? If you're a super experienced player, you can get through ROK without items, no problem. But for a newer player, without, heavily maxed out bots, things like that, things like LOC 1 and 2 are usually fairly difficult the first time. So you want to have a decent stash of revives and repair kits. And so what you're going to want to do is make sure that you start saving those items up before you do it. So you might want to think to yourself, okay, I'm thinking about doing ROK maybe in a few weeks or something. Have some items saved. You can get them through story missions, occasionally through time slides, through the calendar, and most importantly, through crystals, particularly the 4-hour crystals. So I have said before, you always want to be saving crystals up. It's generally a good idea. That is very true with the 4-hour crystals. Because if you save them up for weeks or even months, and you open them up in bulk, let's say at 100 or more at a time, you will get some revives and repair kits. It might not be a lot, but you will get some. And if you have a reasonable stash of items, then you can use those before you have to start thinking about spending Energon. And that's the other thing that you want to do. You want to make sure that you have some Energon saved up and a sort of budget for it, because the last thing that you would want to happen is to go through the map, get 80% of the way done, and then run out of Energon and not be able to finish it, okay? And so after you have a decent stash of those items, you want to be thinking about repair kits and revive kits that you may have to buy, okay? And so what I would highly recommend is that obviously you use the items that you already have first, because you don't have to buy them. But once you do have to spend Energon, if you get to that point, I would highly recommend the squad kits, particularly because in LOC 1 and 2, you have 5-person teams. Now, of course, if you're only reviving bots like Tronus, you can get away with solo kits. But in general, the squad kits are a much better deal. So if you look at the Tier 2 squad revive kit, right, this gives you 25% health for all of the bots on your team. The squad kit is 240 Energon. The solo kit is 95 Energon. So if you were to buy 5 of those Tier 2 revive kits, you'd be spending nearly 500 Energon, which is about twice as much. Same thing with the repair kits, okay? If you go up to the Tier 5 squad repair kit, which gives you 25% health, the squad kit is 150. The solo kit is 50. So if you bought 5 of those solo kits, you'd spend 250. So it's a lot more Energon if you're having to buy a lot of solo kits, okay? And there's 2 other things that I want to highlight. Number 1, is boosts, because boosts will be very helpful to you, right? And the nice thing is boosts are fairly easy to amass through boost crystals, through the calendar, things like that. You want to have some boosts saved up. And so you have, of course, the standard tier 1 damage boost, gives you 10% extra damage for 15 minutes. Remember that you can get this for free when you start the mission. When you just watch the ad, you might as well do that. It will help get you through the first couple of fights. There are a few damage boosts, but then you also have the standard tier 1 health boost, which gives you 15% health for 15 minutes, as well as the tier 2 health boost. This is great for LOC because it gives you 20% health for 45 minutes. It lasts a long time. And I also want to highlight the Rampage boost, because these are for event missions. So for time slides and LOC missions, they give you 15 to 25% attack. So if you pop a Rampage boost at the start of the fight, when the opponent is at 100% health, you will get 25% attack. Even if you use one midway through the fight, you will still get 15% attack. And even though you cannot stack the Rampage boosts, you can stack them with the other attack boosts, the damage boosts, so you can get some extra attack that way. So I certainly recommend that you use boosts throughout, most of the fights. Certainly throughout all of LOC1 can certainly be helpful. It just gives you extra health and attack. And even if you need to buy them, they're cheap, because the standard health and damage boosts are 25 to 30 energon, so not a whole lot. And then I also just want to mention briefly relics, because you're going to want to be sure that you equip whatever relics you have. You're not going to have all of them. You're certainly not going to have the relics that you get by completing LOC 1 and 2, namely the Fallen Titan Hand and the Stable Nucleon Core, but you might have some of these other ones. So you do have the Effigy of Solus Prime, which gives you 4% health. The Star Saber is great. That will give you 3% attack and health. The Allspark, of course, gives you 5% attack and health. You have the Hot Rod Relic, which I think gives you up to 4% attack and health. So whatever relics you have, you equip those, and then you have some boosts, and you have some items, and you will be good to go. Okay? So let's go ahead and jump into the map. So the thing about ROK that makes it scary the first time you do it is the ratings of the bots. So in general, the bots have about 400,000 HP, but the good news is that their attack rating in LOC1 anyway is pretty low, generally less than 1,000, which means that most of the bots are not going to hit that hard. Obviously, you don't want to be getting hit a lot, but if you get hit here and there, it's not going to be a big deal. The one exception, of course, are those on offensive mods. Now, the other good thing about ROK is that the mods tend to be weaker than ROTK, and they're more defensive overall, but there are some offensive mods, including the first bot, Mixmaster. So Mixmaster is on a special damage mod where he will do 300% additional damage. Okay, so even for a rank 5 or 6 bot, if he hits you with a special, you're going to take a lot of damage. Mixmaster is not the most difficult fight. He tends to be somewhat predictable, but you have to just be very careful in baiting out those specials, because if you end up eating them, you're going to take a lot of damage. And the other thing to be mindful of about Mixmaster is you have to be able to dodge a special too. It's not that hard once you get the hang of it, but at first it is kind of tricky. And if you end up eating a special too, I mean, that could kill you depending on the level of bot you have. The other thing I want to mention about Mixmaster is his SIG, because remember, these are all high SIG bots, mostly SIG 100 bots. His concussive block won't do a lot of damage if it happens once, but if it happens over and over again, you could start to eat serious damage. So against Mixmaster, you could certainly use Tronus, you could use any tech bot. It's not a very difficult fight. Just be very careful of his specials in particular, as well as acid. He will be throwing a lot of range shots at you trying to land that acid. So next up we have Sideswipe. So Sideswipe is a very annoying fight just because he's so evasive. You see this once you've played against him a bunch. He evades constantly, and there is no surprise that he is on an evade mod. So he will evade, when he evades melees, he will generate 60% of a power bar. And this is in addition to his normal evasion and power gain, which is already significant because he gains power normally when he evades basic and range shots. And so that means that you have to be very careful of his power at all times, because he will get to a special 2 or even 3 within seconds if you're not paying attention. And so every time he gets to 2 bars of power, definitely back off, bait out that special, because otherwise he's going to start getting lots of special 3s. On top of that, you have to be very careful of his evasion in general. Whenever agility comes up, Do not be going crazy, dashing at him, all of that, because he will evade everything and counter you over and over again. Now, Sideswipe is not on an attack mod, so he's not going to do huge damage if he's hitting you, but obviously you don't want to be getting hit over and over again. So I would highly recommend you bring an anti-evade bot if you have one, particularly Hot Rod or Drift. RC can be a good choice if she's at decent sig, but an anti-evade bot is a good choice. It'll just make the fight easier. You'll get some control of his evasion. And of course, you can also use an anti-evade bot against Barricade, who comes later in the map. If you don't have a bot like Drift or Hot Rod, it's fine. You don't have to use an anti-evade bot, but you're going to want to play Sideswipe very patiently because his power is always going to be going up and up. So that brings us to Grindor. So Grindor, as always, incredibly tanky, and he is on an armor mod, so every time he's attacked, he has a 6% chance to get an 85% armor buff, which is a lot, okay? Now, the 6% chance might seem low, but he has that chance every time he's attacked, so he will definitely get that buff, as well as his built-in armor, which is already significant. On top of that, this armor mod will always activate when you launch a special. So Grindor is just incredibly tanky. For that reason, you really, really need to bring an armor breaker. The best choices would definitely be OGM or OGP. They both have great armor break. Obviously, OGM can steal his buffs, and OGP has that permanent armor break with the special 3. Those are certainly the best choices. If you don't have them, you could bring a bot like Nemesis. You could bring Ultra Magnus. Even Cyclo or Starscream could work. They're not the best choices because even though they will nullify the buffs, he's going to be getting that armor so often, it's going to be hard to keep up. But if you don't have a solid armor breaker like OGM or OGP, I mean, there's a couple other options. Windblade, you know, she does a lot of damage and she has DOT, and of course her special 2 has armor bypass. But if you're not using an armor breaker, it's going to be an incredibly long fight. I mean, even with a bot like Tronus, who has a little bit of armor break, it's just super long. So ideally, you want one of those strong armor-breaking tacticians. Grindor in general is relatively predictable. He's not that hard to fight, but you do need to be mindful of his special 2, of course, that can do a ton of damage. And he loves to attack with his melees. But the main issue with Grindor is just the length of the fight, okay? So that brings us to Starscream. So Starscream is on an enhanced special 2 mod. The special 2 will do 20% more damage and it's unblockable. The good news is his special 2 is pretty easy to dodge, so as long as you can do that, you'll have no problem. So with Starscream, every time he gets 2 bars of power, just bait it out and make sure that you dodge it. The one thing to be careful of with Starscream is his null ray, right? Because, you know, when he nullifies with those basic range shots, those can do a ton of damage, so you just want to be careful of those. And of course, he's going to get that range buff with his special 1. But beyond that, it's a fairly easy fight. Most people use Tronus. You can use any demo. Beyond that, he's definitely one of the easier fights on the map. So that brings us to Bludgeon. So Bludgeon is on a trigger rate mod where his abilities will trigger 150% more often. This is going to be things like his armor and his bleeds. Bludgeon can be annoying to fight. He's not always predictable. He tends to be pretty aggressive, but this is not too difficult of a fight. You just want to be really mindful, particularly of his crits and his bleeds, because if he starts to land them, and he will land them more often, the damage could certainly add up. So certainly, one of the brawlers would do really well against him. A lot of people use Tronus. So just bait out those specials, be very careful of his bleeds, and you should do just fine. So that brings us to Soundwave. So Soundwave is on a very defensive mod. He gets 60% block proficiency. That makes him a bit tanky. The good news about Soundwave is that even though he's aggressive, he's one of the more predictable bots in the game, right? He loves to use his heavy and his specials. His specials are pretty easy to dodge, so that's no problem. You do have to be very careful of his heavy, though, particularly when you dash at him, because even if you're very up close to him, he's very good at landing those heavies, and they're not easy to dodge. Beyond that, though, it's not too difficult of a fight. I would just say, though, that he is Sig 100, which means you do not want to use a ranged-based fighter against him because he will be reflecting constantly, okay? You have to minimize ranged shots in that fight. So for that reason, I would highly recommend bots like Prowl for power control or Kickback for power control, as well as Purification or Sideswipe or Windblade, a bot that can do power control, can do a lot of damage, maybe purify, And like I said, just do not rely on those ranged shots, because otherwise you will get into trouble. So that brings us to Barricade. So kind of like Sideswipe, he is on an evade mod. So he is on a ranged time mod. So he will evade ranged shots significantly more often for timed periods. The mod will go on and off. But remember, that is in addition to his normal evasion, which is particularly annoying when you knock him down. So again, this is why having an anti-evade bot like a Hot Rod or a Drift is a good idea. It just makes things easier. If you don't have a bot like that, you'll do okay. But you're going to maybe have to be very careful with the range shots, and particularly when you knock him down. And remember that he loves to fire off those range shots because he's going to be trying to land backfires on you over and over again. With that said, this is one of the easier fights on the map as long as you play it patiently. So that brings us to Mirage. So Mirage is the most difficult fight on the map. It's a very tough fight because he's on a very strong offensive mod. So he has range shock that does 300% additional damage. It's a lot of shock. So even rank 5, rank 6 bots will eat a lot of shock damage if he starts landing those hits. And remember, if he's using his special 1, he's going to get that ranged bonus that's already built in, and it can be very difficult to dodge all of those shots. So you have to be really careful with Mirage. It is a tough fight. But there's a few good options. I would say Kickback is probably the best option because you're getting both Purification of Shock and Power Control. You want to prevent him from getting that special 1 as much as possible. Sideswipe is good too because he does Purify Shock, but in that case, you're going to want to probably be pushing him up to a special 2 as much as you can, as long as you can block his special 2. A lot of people will use Prowl. He is a great option because he can Power Control Mirage very, very well. But just remember that Prowl does not Purify Shock. So if you start eating range shots, you will have trouble. Same thing with Windblade. She can do tons and tons of damage, lots of DOT, but she does not Purify Shock. So I would have one of those scouts and then probably one of the more general purifiers like Grim or TC as backup if you can. So that brings us to Bonecrusher. Bonecrusher is not that hard, but he is pretty annoying because of the mod that he's on. He's on Reflect Range, which is pretty clever because, of course, he can land bleeds on you when you hit him with melees. And so they put this Reflect Ranged on him. It's very similar to Soundwave Sig or the mod that Primal is on in Alliance missions. They will deal 200% of the original damage, which is a fair amount. So for this fight, I would highly recommend one of the melee-based brawler purifiers / healers, particularly TC, MV1, or Primal. Okay, any of those 3 can do fine. If you are using TC, you're going to have to use the heavy, of course, which is a ranged shot to purify, but that's fine. You don't have to fire it at him. But any of those 3 are going to do well because you can heavily rely on melee shots. Okay, if you have to use Grimlock, it's okay. This is what I had to do the first time because I didn't have those other bots ranked up. But if you are using Grim, it will be kind of annoying and long because you cannot rely on his heavy, which is a very important part of his kit, because of course Bonecrusher will be reflecting Grimlock's heavy over and over again. So Grim is an option if you need to, but I would recommend one of the other brawlers if you can. Okay, so that brings us to Ultra Magnus. He is on an armor piercing mod, so 120% armor piercing. So his shots will do more damage to you. You have to be kind of careful. And the thing about Ultra Magnus is he is a very intelligent AI bot. He tends to be pretty fast. He reacts quickly, and he's less predictable than a lot of bots. So he's not a hard fight, but he's not super easy either. Most people will simply use Tronus or one of the demos. Thankfully, though, the mod is not that difficult. So as long as you're careful, you're patient, you bait out his specials, you don't fight overly aggressively, you should do just fine against him. And then finally, that brings us to Demotron. So Revenge of the Fallen Megatron. Even though he's the last fight, he's actually one of the easiest. And that's because Demotron is kind of like Soundwave in the sense that he's very aggressive, but he's also extremely predictable. He tends to follow a very similar pattern over and over again. So that will be good news for you once you get to the end. He is on a very defensive, tanky mod. So he's on Cycle Resist. He alternates between physical and energy resistance, so he takes significantly less damage. The good news is you can mitigate that by paying attention to the mod and doing the opposite. So if physical resistance is on, you want to land those ranged shots, those energy shots. And if energy resistance is on, you want to land those melees. And if you do that, the fight will not be that long. So any tech bot, any shielded bot, certainly Tronus, will do just fine against Demotron, okay? And so I want to wrap up. I want to talk about recommended bots and teams with some final thoughts. I know I offered some recommended bots for each fight, but there's really just a few categories, a few bases that you want to cover, okay? First of all, we want to talk about rankings, right? So what rank should your bots be at, right? Well, obviously that depends on skill level, but if you're like a newer to mid-level player, like I said, you're good enough to do it. That's obviously the baseline requirement. I would say having 5-star rank 4 bots is probably the ideal. You don't have to have rank 5 or 6 bots to do it. Rank 4 is a very good, comfortable place to be. Now, can you do it with rank 3s or rank 2s? Yeah, of course. But I would say that for the mid-level player, rank 4s are going to be the most comfortable. With that said, if you don't have a lot of 5 stars yet and you've gotten pretty good, you can certainly do it with maxed out 4 stars, particularly if they're well forged, if they're decent sig, and if you're a pretty good player, you can do that. But I would say at least maxed out 4 stars or rank 3 to 4, 5 stars, and you will be good to go, okay? And then I really want to mention the primary areas, the primary bases that you want to cover in terms of your teams, okay? So, number 1, look, if you have Tronus, definitely bring him. He's the best bot in the game. He's the best bot for long fights. He's heavily used in LOC, all of the LOCs, for good reason. Now, with that said, I did not have Tronus when I first did ROK, so I was not able to bring him. And at the time, I think I had a combination of rank 4s and 5s. I did not have Tronus, and I think I got through it with maybe 1 revive the entire map. And this was a long time ago. I was a lot less experienced. So you don't need Tronus, but if you have him, certainly bring him. Beyond that, there's a few primary bases. So like I said, an armor breaker, a purifier, an anti-evade bot, and then finally, healing bots. So healing bots in general are always going to be good for LOC missions. So besides Tronus, if you have bots like Wheeljack, Ratchet, a decent SIG Shockwave, a decent SIG Nemesis, obviously bots like MV1 for Bonecrusher, any bot that heals is going to do very well. And that's why, by the way, I mentioned Kickback. He's a great choice because he also heals. Even Dinobot can heal. Any bots that heal that you play well with are going to do well in LOC fights in general. It's just a guaranteed layer of protection. So the primary bases to cover are armor breakers, purifiers, anti-evade bots, and healing bots. You don't have to have all of them, but if you're able to cover several of those bases, you will be in much better shape. And then I just want to mention a few other possibilities in terms of teams, because there's a lot of bots that can do well in LOC, and at the end of the day, you want to play with bots that you do well with, but there's a few things to think about. Number 1, if you're using OGP, bringing him with Ratchet, one of the best synergies in the game because it allows OGP to heal, and for that reason, you can end up using OGP in a lot of these fights. I would also say OGP with Jazz. So particularly if you don't have a bot like Kickback or Prowl, Jazz is a great option because he's built for long fights. Number 1, he has the permanent backfire with the special 3, and also his synergy with OGP is one of the best in the game because it significantly ramps up his damage. Jazz can do phenomenal damage when he's played with OGP if you're a good player. Those are good options. I also wanted to mention a couple others. The Enforcer synergy. If you have Kickback, you bring a bot like Motormaster or Ramjet. Ramjet would be good if you don't have Tronus because the Enforcer synergy, if you're using Kickback a lot, debuffs last significantly longer and they cannot be purified. And then the last synergy that I really want to mention is Beast Wars, right? So if you have Primal and at least 2 others ranked up, you could do that. You could use 3 Beast Wars characters along with 2 others. Could be Tronus, OGM, whatever you want. But Beast Wars would certainly do well. And in general, by the way, you just want to be thinking about synergies. Synergizing is always going to help you out. So those are the main things that I would think about when you decide which team to bring with you. And then the final thing that I want to say, the best piece of advice I could give you when you do ROK for the first time is just take your time with it. Be patient. So what I would do is set aside an afternoon for it. Set aside a few hours and then do a few fights at a time. Because if you just try to rush through it, if you do 10 long fights in a row, you're going to start to get tired, you're going to lose concentration, you're going to lose focus, and you're going to start making mistakes. So what I would do is do a few fights, take a break, come back, do a few more fights. Because remember that with LOC1 and 2, once you start it, you have to finish it or back out. And so you don't want to exhaust yourself. The best thing to do then is to take your time, be patient, play carefully, and then it'll give you the best chance of success while minimizing item use and energon use. So I hope that this has been helpful. Please do let me know if you have any questions. I will release the video on ROTK in the next few days. Until then, be well, and we will speak soon.